Hello and welcome to the Dream Architect Life with Bryan Sweet and Brittany Anderson from Sweet Financial Partners. I want to let you know, if you have not heard their first two podcasts, you've got to go back and listen to it. The first podcast was really their inaugural podcast. You got to know them personally and a little bit about their history and business. It's just a great one to get a real baseline for who they are. And this last podcast, number 2, was really talking about the Dream Architect and why they created this podcast specifically. Again, that's going to give you a great foundation. But today we're going to I'm going to do that again, edit team. Today we're going to continue on and continue to talk about possibility. Brittany, how are you?
I am so good.
I know you are. You're fantastic. And I'm so excited to be back with you. Bryan, how are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. This is so good to be here.
All right. I love that you guys are always talking about possibility. Both of you are some of the most positive people I know. And one thing that you said on the last podcast was possibility comes to those who create it. I love the statement. Bryan, remind us what that statement's all about.
Well, anything in life that's good, you have to have a part in making it that way. And so part of the whole process of making great things happen is just being intentional about it and thinking about it. And if you just let life pass by, not everything that you want to have happen is going to happen. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in detail as we go through the podcast today.
Sounds good to me. Brittany, let me ask you almost the same question. What does possibility mean to you? And specifically this quote.
Yeah. When you think about the term possibility and possibility coming to those who create it, I think it goes back to the adage of life happening for you and not to you. So, everywhere you look, there are things that occur in your life, good, bad, and everything in between. And it's all about what you do with it. So as it relates to really what we do in the core of our business at Sweet Financial Partners, we're constantly looking at how can we help our clients realize possibility? Mm-hmm. How can we help them put that hard-earned money to work for them? How can we help them see things that they may not even know are even options and explore what that next chapter of life looks like? So that's really what possibility is. And we just get to help create it, which is really fun.
Yeah, exceptionally fun.
All right. So let's talk about what today's podcast is about. What are we going to be talking about?
We are going to keep on this journey. So, Bryan and I were talking about this one instance in particular leading up to today's recording session, giving some examples and just some stories about people we've had the great pleasure of working with to give example and context to what possibility means. We think about it and you don't have to be an extremely high earner or a business owner or an entrepreneur or all of those titles or things in life that tend to warrant and lead to wealth building. Sometimes it starts with a plan that's incredibly simple, but Bryan using the word intentional. Intentionality is everything. And it really goes down to the foundation of understanding what your values are, understanding what is meaningful to you, to your family, to your legacy, to your future. So we thought we would kick off by sharing a story and talking a little bit about that, putting it into context. Bryan and I, we joke about how it seems so easy to be visionaries and to dream big and to think about the future. And we get really excited about that. I think about my husband in particular, and he's like, yes, hon, I love that future stuff for you, but he needs that coaxing. He needs somebody to help him build that vision because he just doesn't think in the future sense. He's constantly present. So he's not the only one. There's people out there like that. And that's more common than the alternative. So that's really what today is about and the stories and just the impact that goes behind that.
Bryan, I got to ask, because that's a great point Brittany just made. People are wired differently, right? And so I know that in all the years that you've been doing this, you've come across people that are very concrete thinkers. I am thinking of today. I'm thinking of what happened last week maybe and how I can change today to fix what happened last week. But some people really, really struggle in saying, okay, I'm thinking about next year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and what that vision could look like, while today I'm just working hard at being the best I can right now. How do you help people figure that out or dream beyond today?
Yeah, great question. I would tell you that fortunately or unfortunately, most people are exactly that way. They get tied up in the day to day and this is life. And We have to get all these things accomplished, and there's, all the daily stresses. And fortunately, Brittany and I have been very grateful that we've gotten the opportunity to be around some amazing thinkers, be around some amazing mastermind groups that almost force us to think big and think out of the box. And so we've just seen the miraculous change that can occur when you look into the future and see something that you want and then work it backwards on, like, how do I get it? And so we want to share some of that, fortunate stuff that we've learned to help people understand that what goes on day to day is great and you have to keep that. But whatever you want in life is so possible, but you have to do a few things to actually get there. But no one's ever really told them or how to do it, or trained them, or even told them that they should think a different way. And so that's really one of the purposes of this podcast.
Yeah. And I want to tell the listening audience, one of the purposes of me being here is to help derail where they're going with this podcast and ask these types of questions. I don't want to derail that story that's coming. So why don't you tell us about that? I appreciate you entertaining me with me being able to ask those types of questions, Bryan, and you're spot on in answering that. But let's get back to that story.
Yeah. So, Bryan, I think I'm going to let you tell it, because Mr. Sweet actually, to set the stage on this, had a one-on-one conversation with this gentleman when he was really young. I think almost fresh out of high school. Yeah. So fast forward, and there's some amazing things that have happened along the way. So I'm going to let Bryan tell it, since he was actually there.
Yeah. So this is a story that's actually quite a few years old, but it's so relevant because of the outcome. So I had a very young client, and he was one person that wanted to have a better life. And he thought, if I do some things at a young age, and I think he had some guidance from his parents, if I recall, about, if you do some things when you're younger, life can be much easier down the road. So fortunately, he came to us, and we got together and started some conversations of what life would look like and what were some of his wishes and dreams and ultimate goals. And obviously he wanted to get married and have a family and be successful and literally, be able to do what he wanted to. But his main goal was he wanted to have the ability to retire at age 50. And I would tell you that's a very aggressive goal, but at a young age like he was, it's really not out of the question. So we sat down and got real specifics on short-term, long-term, ultimate goals. And then this is something we've updated from time to time as things have changed. And we laid out this very specific plan that if he does X, Y, and Z, and then, we need to review it from time to time and make tweaks as we need to, that this should accomplish everything that you need. Well, to make a really long story short, and then Brittany, you can interject some additional thoughts here. One of the really interesting things is that he followed that absolutely to a T. He didn't miss a payment. He did everything he said. And first of all, he's farther ahead than he ever was on that illustration, which is kind of interesting. Two, I gave him kind of a 1-2 pager report that kind of said, well, here's where, the bogeys will be at various time frames. And, if you spent money for this will be where the balances are at various ages. And he carries that with him literally daily. And every time I see him, he has that report, or he says, I've got that report. And it's such a great conversation. I just saw him actually today, and it was so fun to run into him because he isn't, an extremely high wage earner, but I would tell you his net worth would be better than 95% of the clients that I know, simply because he had a thought, an idea, a dream, and he was willing to do the right thing, which was hard, but doing it over is even harder. And it's such a great story because he's still relatively a young guy, but he was telling me that he's got a plan to go on a trip with his wife. They're renting this really beautiful house on the ocean. It's got a pier off it. Apparently, they have a crab trap at the bottom of this, and they bring in fresh crabs for him. And his face just lights up like a Christmas tree when he talks about that. And he's just so grateful. But I didn't really do anything except encourage him, gave him a path to run on. He literally did all the work himself. But that's just one great story about if you want something and you're willing to be a little disciplined and maybe do without a little something today for the big benefit down the road, unbelievable what can happen. And like I said, he's still, he didn't decide to retire, but he's, way ahead of whatever he wanted to do. Brittany, anything else you'd add to that? I probably have left out half of the good details.
No, I think you covered the details perfectly. The thing that just comes to mind every time, and I've heard this story because we live this story in our business, but I think about how many people don't do what this gentleman did. Mm-hmm. And how many people, when you think about creating possibility for yourself, again, for your family, for your legacy, for your future, how many people don't act with intentionality? How many people are wandering around like arrows with zero target, just kind of shooting things off into space, hoping something sticks, hoping that their future pans out the way that they want it to? So, we get to be a small piece of the puzzle for helping people live and create the life that they can't wait to wake up to. And that's exciting. That's something that gets you out of bed in the morning and that helps your feet hit the floor with purpose and with that knowledge, knowing that you get to have that impact on people. So even more so than, fancy investment strategies or, any product or service are out there, that stuff does not matter as much as setting the intentionality for your future.
Okay, let's just take a step back here, because
do we get a little eager?
here's what struck me about this story. So Bryan, let me ask you this. How many years ago was that?
I don't know exactly, but let's just say 30-ish.
Yeah, and that's what I was kind of figuring with what the time frame and how old he is and so on and so forth. So what strikes me is the fact that I've seen your office. I see the room you're sitting in right now. I have never seen a crystal ball at that location ever, right? But this gentleman, right?
Well, I keep trying to polish it, but I can't get it clean. So
that's right. And so here's what it is, though. In the last 30 years, they lived through 0102. They lived through 08, 09. You didn't have a crystal ball. You didn't know those things were going to happen. You didn't know COVID was going to happen. All the different things that have happened in the last 30 years, they still navigated those things. They still are not only are they on track for those goals, they're well beyond them, right? So I think there's a lot of fear and a lot of concern out there with people that have lived through 08, 09 and things that have happened in the last couple of years with COVID and the pandemic and such, that they're almost frozen in not being able to dream, not being able to look past what's happened to them in the last decade or two. How do you help people move past that so that they don't have those hinder them, that they don't set up those hurdles for themselves, and can say, you know what, even though we had this path and we wrote this down years ago, we had no idea these things were coming, but it still was possible. How do you help people move past that?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is you have to get them to have the right mindset and time frame. So, this type of plan is really a longer term time frame. And so, lots of things, as you just alluded to, happen in the short run that over any period of time can, upset the apple cart, if you will. But it also shows that if you stick to a plan for a very long period of time, I think there's some old saying that you can get so much more accomplished in a long period of time, but you overestimate what you can do in the short run. And that applies to this also. And so I think it's just getting people to understand that there is going to be volatility. I don't know if you can ever get people from not being nervous about it, but understanding, you'll have enough money in the short run if you need money that will take it out of an account that isn't subject to fluctuation. And what we're concerned about is 10 or 20 or 30 years from now. And so when you have that volatility, don't be alarmed by it. Actually look at it as a positive thing, because if you're continuing to add money to accounts, do you want to buy low or buy high? And essentially, that's what you want to do, is buy low. And that'll happen from time to time, which in this particular case, he continued to add to it when we had those dips, bought a lot more shares when he could, and those all had this great appreciation. And part of the success and why he's ahead is because he kept investing when the markets were down. And so just to show you that little theory that everybody learned in Investing 101 really does work.
Yeah. And there's some guy out there named Warren Buffett that talks about that. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. Most people.
He did something positive, I think, one time, or
that whole buying low and investing more when the market is down. I've heard that from that guy as well. And I think we're in good company, pretty smart folks here. So let me ask you this. When it comes to possibility, it's hard for people to envision that sometimes. It's hard for people to define that. How do you do that? How do you help people to do that?
Yeah, so I can take this one. One thing that we've put a lot of time and effort in, and Bryan and I have kind of forced ourselves into, is how can we create something tangible? How can we do something for clients, for people that we're able to help, to really help them back into what that future vision looks like? Because as we said at the beginning of this session, not everybody is excited about the future and possibility and that vision as Bryan and I are. So we actually have, if you go to mysweetfinancial.com, we have a plethora of tools, resources, videos that we've created that really help lay out how you can go about that. How do you even start thinking about that? We have some mindset tools in there even, and you might be listening going, wait a second, I thought I was listening to a podcast with some wealth people in there.
Yeah.
What are we doing talking about mindset? And the thing that we want to point out is that the money doesn't necessarily matter if the mindset isn't right. And if you're not focused on your future and what you want to accomplish. So those are some of the tools that we have spent a lot of time and energy building. We're constantly revamping. We're in the process of a revamp in that particular retirement readiness center so that we can constantly add even more value to the people that are accessing those tools.
Fantastic. Bryan, do you have anything to add?
Well, first of all, I would highly recommend you get to mysweetfinancial.com. The Retirement Readiness Center's really got some amazing tools, but I think one of the key things that you want to remember is it's not a magic formula and you just like go to this website and this stuff happens. You do have to put the work in, but if you do the work and you're consistent and you're disciplined, it's amazing what can happen. And just like the story we shared today, there's lots of stories. This one has a personal meaning because he was a really young guy, doesn't make a lot of money, and absolutely has crushed it. And I think it's just a good reminder that anyone that has the right mindset, a little discipline, and wants to set a plan to have a bigger, better future, absolutely can do it. No matter what anybody else tells you, absolutely can happen.
Well, I appreciate what you just said, but you said it in a very humble way. I would add, anybody who has the right mindset and some discipline and a good guide, right? Somebody, a good mentor or guide, Bryan. And I know that's the role you've filled many times with a lot of clients, and you wouldn't say it out loud, but I'm going to, because I know you well enough.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to stay on course and to have somebody in your corner saying you can do it. Hey, anytime you want to give me a call and talk about it, I'll make sure that you're on track. You know, I don't want to say that you're a cheerleader, but you're part coach, part cheerleader. You have to be both.
100%. I would agree with that.
Yeah. Well, I know we're running low on today's podcast, but Brittany, I'm gonna throw it back to you because you're talking about a vision of the future, and that's one of the things that you've said in this podcast. I want you to give our audience a vision of the future. What are we going to be talking about on the next podcast?
Yeah. So we started off today talking about how possibility comes to those who create it. And some people might be listening going, what does that mean exactly? What are the actions that I take going forward? So in the next episode, we are going to spend some time talking about how you can define what possibility means to you. Different tools, different resources, and different thought processes to really help you with that visioning, because as we said, we know that that's not something that just comes naturally to everybody. So we'll give you some groundwork and a runway to help you go on that path.
All right. Well, you don't want to miss that, because tools, resources, that's what we all need. And then you incorporate that coach and cheerleader. It's going to be fantastic. So Bryan and Brittany, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Eric. We appreciate it.
You bet. And our last thank you goes to you, listening audience. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the Dream Architect Life podcast with Bryan Sweet and Brittany Anderson. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Bryan and Brittany come out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it really easy to share these podcasts with your friends and family. And these right now, these are great ones to share, because if you guys do this journey together, you have accountability partners within your own family, within your own friend circle. And that's just going to make you more successful. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at Sweet Financial Partners, this is Eric Johnson reminding you that possibility comes to those who create it. And we'll see you next time.